So my name is Brian Credo, and I'm here today to talk to you about Expulsion and ancient Greek comedy. So, what do vaudeville canes, baseball umpires, and Senate trials all have in common? They all, in theory, have the ability to tell someone, you're out. I mean, just look at Bugs Bunny right here. He's timid, he's bombing, he's everything I don't want this Ben talk to be. So what do? We take him and we yank him off the stage. Now, the Greeks had their own ways of expelling unwanted elements from society. The first of these is called ostracism. And ostracism is a process by which you would vote for someone to expel from the city. They had to leave for 10 years, but they didn't forfeit any of their property, and they would be summoned back after the 10 years had elapsed. And the way you would vote for the person to ostracize was you would take a piece of broken pottery, and you would take a broken piece and you would write the name of the person that you wanted to expel on the piece of broken pottery. And if you stick around afterward, you can come and get your own piece of broken pottery. And we're not going to expel any people because that would be mean, but we're going to write the name of a bad habit on your piece of pottery. It can be texting while driving, it can be smoking. Whatever you wish people didn't do in society, we will tally up the votes and see whom we're going to expel. But ostracism isn't the only way of getting rid of people. There's also Greek scapegoat ritual. Now, unlike the ancient Israelites, the Greeks didn't use actual goats, they used human beings. And one author who tells us about scapegoats is named Hipponax. He lived in the 6th century BC. And through extensive archaeological excavations, I've actually found a kit that contains some of the things Hipponax would have used when he was performing scapegoat rituals. And it comes in the form of this nickelback backpack, obviously one of the most scapegoated bands of the last 10 years. So, let's see what Hipponax tells us about scapegoats. He says, we must cleanse the city and beat the scapegoat with fig branches. Okay, we'll do that, fig branches. And then he says, then we must offer him, let's see what we're going to offer him. We're going to offer him dried figs. Here we go, dried figs. And then barley. I have rye bread, close enough. And finally, some cheese. And so, it's pretty easy to tell what all of these things have in common. They're all food, and this is going to be important for what Hipponax tells us next about scapegoating. He says, then let him waste away with hunger. Now this is important because scapegoats are often identified with rapacious figures who eat away everything from the community. And this is ritually reenacted through the scapegoat eating certain foods. But after he has eaten certain foods, he needs to be identified with a famine or a plague or something that is bad that's going to be expelled from the community. So that's what the fasting symbolizes. And this is an important piece of evidence that actually links scapegoating and ostracism together. This is one of those pieces of broken pottery that I was talking about earlier, and it says ton limon ostrakido, which means I ostracize hunger. So in this case, instead of expelling a person, we're actually naming hunger as the object or the person that we're trying to get rid of. And this is a good piece of evidence to show us that scapegoating and ostracism are pretty closely related. But Hipponax isn't the only person who tells us about scapegoating. We also have another account from Strabo, as I wipe the shards of broken glass off of it. So let's listen to what Strabo says. He says, it is the ancestral custom of the Lefkadians, the inhabitants of the island of Lefkas, every year during the festival of Apollo, that a criminal be hurled off the cliff there for the sake of warding off evil, that he be laden with all sorts of birds and feathers to soften his fall, and that he be taken up by the many men who are stationed down below in a circle. They shall receive him with small nets and take him to safety beyond their borders. So, that about does it for the expulsive institutions that I'm looking at. And now I would like to turn your attention to comedy. And I'd like to explicate something that makes a lot of intuitive sense, namely that comedy, in its harsh mockery, has the function of excluding certain characters, some of them based on historical political figures, and some of them entirely fictional. And in service of that goal, it often makes use of these expulsive institutions, just like the two we've looked at. And to demonstrate this, I'd like to look at a couple of scenes from Aristophanes' play, Wealth. Now, Wealth is a utopian play, and the premise is that the god Wealth has gone blind, and he thus can't choose who he spends his time with, and he gives himself to people who really don't deserve him, bad people who don't deserve to be rich. But the main character of the play ultimately finds a way to restore sight to Wealth, and then Wealth can give himself to the good people who really deserve him. But Wealth isn't the only god in the play. We also have Poverty. And to play Poverty, I would like to call out my friend and colleague, Isabella. And unlike Isabella, Poverty is this haggard, disgusting figure. And so Cremulus, the main character of the play, reacts in a very adult way when he first sees Poverty. He says, get away from me.
Who do you think you are, trying to expel me?
I'm not trying to expel you, just throw you into the pit. All right, end scene, we're gonna pause there. Now, notice what Cremulus says. He says that he's not going to expel Poverty, just throw her into the pit. But the joke here is that throwing a criminal into the pit at Athens as a form of capital punishment is closely related to throwing scapegoats off a cliff, like we saw earlier. So Cremulus isn't going to expel Poverty, he's just going to expel her. And ultimately he gets his way. And so now we'll take a look at the next scene when Cremulus actually does expel Poverty. And she says,
Woe is me.
you need to get away now.
Where on earth will I go?
You can go hang yourself for all I care. Just get out of here.
Mark my words, you'll summon me back here one day.
All right, thank you very much, Isabella. Now, notice what Poverty says. She is certain that she's going to be summoned back. This isn't a detail that happens during scapegoating, but it is one that happens during ostracism. So the first scene that we looked at had a detail that was closely associated with Scapegoat Ritual, and the second one had a detail that was associated with ostracism. So where does this get us? Like our pottery that expels hunger, these scenes show us that comedy does not just employ individual expulsive institutions, but rather a unified concept of expulsion that can make use of whatever institutions it happens to have at hand. And so, with that in mind, I will kindly expel myself from the stage, and thank you very much for listening.